When a narcissist suddenly goes silent, many people make the mistake of interpreting that silence as dominance, as though their withdrawal signifies control, superiority, or power. But let me offer you another lens, one that is more psychologically sound and spiritually revealing. Their silence in many instances is not strength, it's fear, it's evasion, and most importantly, it's exposure. That silence is the sound of a dark and manipulative spirit shrinking back from something it cannot twist or control, your awakening awareness. Let's examine this more deeply. Narcissists operate on emotional leverage. They thrive on reactions, especially negative ones: anger, confusion, pleading, defensiveness. These are the emotional currencies they feed on and manipulate into dominance. They know exactly how to provoke, how to bait, how to lure you back into a psychological maze of self-doubt and dependency. But what happens when you no longer participate? When you stop reacting, when you resist the impulse to explain or justify yourself, when you refuse to engage in their endless performance? That's when your silence creates a vacuum they cannot fill. And in that emptiness, they are forced to face the unbearable truth. Their control over you is slipping. The narcissist isn't usually aware of this process in spiritual terms, but their behavior exposes it. When they suddenly withdraw, they aren't simply punishing you, they're recalibrating. They retreat because your composure, your lack of submission, disturbs the fragile scaffolding of their false self. You have unintentionally exposed the fractures in their carefully constructed mask, and their instinctive response is to disappear, hoping that you'll crumble in the uncertainty they've left behind. But here's the real truth. Their silence isn't a demonstration of power. It's a retreat into the shadows, away from your illumination. Silence, in the hands of a narcissist, is not passive. It's loaded with manipulation. It's a tactic, yes, but it's also a symptom. It reflects their discomfort with your emotional resistance. The less you pursue, the more they panic. The more you remain anchored in your self-worth, the more unstable they become. Think of it this way: a parasite cannot survive without a host. If the host becomes immune to its influence, the parasite either adapts or flees. That's what you witness when they fall silent. Their parasitic, vampiric energy can no longer extract sustenance from your reactions, and that terrifies them. There's a psychological layer here too. Narcissistic personalities are profoundly insecure. They build an inflated false image to escape the pain of their own inadequacy. This false identity requires constant validation, admiration, fear, envy, submission to stay intact. When you interrupt that supply, when your behavior suggests independence and self-assurance, they feel an internal collapse. Silence becomes their coping mechanism, a disguised sulk masquerading as strategy. What's fascinating about this silence is the symbolism it carries. It's the dragon slinking back into its cave, the darkness recoiling from light. In biblical language, it's the demon exposed by truth. It's not a force of might, but of evasion. They avoid engagement because true communication demands honesty and vulnerability, qualities they cannot handle without disintegrating the illusion of control. So when a narcissist pulls away into silence after you've begun standing your ground, understand it clearly. It isn't your failure, it's their discomfort. They aren't punishing you, they're avoiding themselves. If they were to face you directly, they'd have to face their own emptiness, their own lack of authenticity, and that confrontation is spiritually unbearable for them. Here lies the philosophical depth of this dynamic. A person ruled by narcissism, whether you define it as pathology, energy, or archetype, is enslaved to illusion. They live trapped in performance, terrified of truth. And when you start to embody that truth through calmness, boundaries, and clarity, you become a mirror reflecting what they fear most: authenticity. Your very presence becomes a threat. That's why they pull away. Not because you're powerless, but because you've become spiritually dangerous to them. Your silence now is not submission, it's sovereignty. Theirs, however, is avoidance. You stay quiet because you no longer need to explain. They stay quiet because they no longer know how to manipulate. And in that reversal, their illusion collapses. This can be unsettling at first. You might wonder, why did they vanish? What did I do wrong? But that's the hook. They want to seed doubt, to make you question your reality, to coax you back into reaction. Resist that temptation. Because when you chase their silence, you give it meaning. Instead, see it for what it is: a confirmation that your growth is unsettling their control. Your clarity has disrupted their confusion. Your peace has disturbed their performance. Understand, this isn't just psychological, it's spiritual. When someone manipulates, deceives, gaslights, and abuses, they are being governed by something darker than ego. Your refusal to engage that energy is a form of spiritual rebellion. And when they sense that rebellion, they cloak their retreat in silence. But that quiet is proof of your victory. You've become the mirror they cannot bear to look into, the truth they cannot distort. Their silence, therefore, isn't the sound of control. It's the echo of defeat. Your task is not to break that silence, but to stand firm within it, to remain steady in the storm of their withdrawal. What you're witnessing is not your collapse, but theirs. They are not abandoning you. They are escaping themselves. For if they confronted you with honesty, their carefully built illusion would crumble, and that's a risk their fragile ego cannot endure. Eventually, they might try to reappear with charm, apologies, or feigned remorse, but this time you'll see differently. You'll recognize the tremor beneath their words, the desperation under their calm. You'll feel the hollowness behind the performance. That's when you'll understand the full truth. When the manipulative force inside them realizes it has lost control over you, it retreats, it hides, it falls silent. And that silence is your triumph. Let it reverberate. Let it remind you that you've stopped feeding the illusion. You are no longer nourishment for their emptiness. You are no longer a character in their shadow game. Sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is nothing. Not from indifference, but from strength, clarity, and self-possession. So when the narcissist withdraws into silence, don't panic, don't chase, don't misinterpret it as loss. See it as what it is: a spirit once sustained by your weakness, now starving in the presence of your strength. It's one of life's great paradoxes, especially within toxic relationships. The most powerful response is often the most subtle. Not shouting, not pleading, not striving to have the last word, but remaining calm, grounded, and unshaken. When you do that, the narcissist doesn't see peace. They see danger, because your calmness doesn't just signal self-control, it exposes the loss of their control. Your stillness to them feels like rebellion. You have to grasp what emotional dominance means to a narcissist. It's their currency, their life force. Their self-worth is externally constructed, dependent entirely on others' responses. If you admire them, they feel grand. If you fear them, they feel powerful. If you hate them, they still feel relevant. But if you are calm, truly unmoved, detached, and indifferent, something inside them panics, because that quietness reveals an unbearable truth. They no longer matter to you. To a narcissistic mind, being irrelevant is worse than death. You may think they only feed on admiration, but that's a misconception. They feed on intensity, any intensity, Whether it's love or hate, admiration or outrage, it's all energy to them. They crave being the emotional center of your world. As long as your mind, your heart, and your focus orbit around them, they win. But when your emotional landscape stabilizes, when you stop overanalyzing, stop reacting, stop fighting shadows, they lose their grip. Something ancient and primal shifts within them. It's not merely that you've stopped reacting, it's that your serenity now highlights their chaos. Your balance illuminates their instability. Your peace becomes a spotlight that exposes their internal disorder. That's why your calm terrifies them, because your silence doesn't mean defeat, it signifies transcendence. You've risen above their reach, and for someone whose identity thrives on manipulation, that's the ultimate threat. When you hold that space quietly, confidently, the illusion of their superiority dissolves. Their silence then becomes a mirror of their own emptiness. And you become the embodiment of what they'll never master: inner peace, self-awareness, and truth. And that exposure is unbearable. Not because you're doing anything aggressive, but because you're doing something they cannot do. You're being still. Stillness for a narcissist is alien terrain. Their inner world is a tempest, swirling insecurity, buried shame, unhealed wounds. They spend their lives projecting that storm outward, trying to escape it by controlling everyone else's emotional weather. But when you become still, when you create emotional clarity, they are forced to face their own dissonance, and that terrifies them. This is why your calmness shakes them to their core. It's not passive, it's not weak, it's a declaration of sovereignty. It says, "You no longer define my reality." And that message is profoundly threatening to someone whose entire identity revolves around defining others. Now, let's be clear. We're not talking about a cold indifference that stems from numbness or suppression. We're talking about intentional calmness, earned stillness, the kind that emerges from self-awareness, boundaries, and inner healing, the kind that develops after chaos, when you finally decide you're not returning to that storm. This level of calm is rooted in psychological maturity, something the narcissist not only lacks, but resents deeply, because they cannot access it. They've spent so long constructing a false identity, wearing a mask, that they've become disconnected from their own soul. And your calmness is a reminder of everything they've lost touch with. It's vital to understand that narcissists are, in many ways, spiritually starving. They crave depth but fear it. They long to be seen but dread being truly known. So they choose control instead, and control requires reaction. When you stop reacting, when you quit explaining, defending, or over-justifying, you dismantle their only weapon. You remove the fuel that sustains their false identity. The beauty of this is that it doesn't require confrontation. You don't need to shout, label, or expose them. In fact, it's better that you don't. Words can be twisted, but energy cannot lie. When your nervous system refuses to engage, when your response is grounded, measured presence, they feel it, not mentally, but somatically. Their body senses that the spell is breaking. This is also why narcissists often escalate when you become calm. They may try to provoke you harder, hurl accusations, insult you, or say shocking things just to elicit a reaction. Because to them, anything is preferable to indifference. Rage is better than silence. Tears are better than composure. They need you dysregulated because your emotional chaos validates their existence. But if you remain centered, if you refuse to abandon your inner balance, something profound happens. They begin to expose themselves. Without your reactions to disguise their dysfunction, their true nature becomes visible. You begin to see the cracks in their reasoning, the contradictions in their stories, the fragility behind their arrogance. And more importantly, they start to sense it too. They might not consciously acknowledge it, but on a subconscious level, it disturbs them deeply. They may retreat or they may lash out. Whatever form it takes, it's proof that your presence has unsettled them at the deepest level. Because a narcissist expects to be the storm in your life. When they're met with the unwavering stillness of your soul, they feel powerless. And for a being that survives on control, that is the beginning of their unraveling. Philosophically, this is a confrontation between truth and illusion. The narcissist lives in illusion, a false world constructed to protect a wounded self. Your calmness represents truth, not merely spoken truth, but embodied truth. And when those two energies collide, truth doesn't argue, it doesn't shout, it simply stands, and illusion eventually crumbles before it. This is why healing is such a revolutionary act. When you recover from narcissistic abuse, when you step into clarity, emotional balance, and self-possession, you become a genuine threat to their illusion. Not because you attack, but because you refuse to engage. Your very existence becomes evidence that their tactics no longer have influence. That's why they might attempt to smear you, mock you, or re-enter your life with charm. It's never about affection, it's about control. But once you've reclaimed your calm, they cannot touch it unless you invite them in. The key then is to cultivate that stillness, to anchor yourself in truth, not just mentally, but emotionally and spiritually. When your nervous system is regulated, when your boundaries are firm, when your energy is grounded, you evolve into the kind of person who doesn't need to prove anything. And when you don't need to prove anything, the narcissist loses their leverage completely. Their power was never authentic. It was borrowed from your reactions. Think about that. They never possessed real authority. They merely accessed yours. The moment you stop handing it over, the illusion shatters. They shrink, they falter, they panic, and yet you remain composed, certain, and free. So if you're in the process of detaching, if you've chosen to stop reacting and engaging, stay the course. Trust the discomfort, the silence, the trembling moments of uncertainty. Because what's shaking isn't your world, it's theirs. Your stillness is what's causing the quake. That's how you win. Not by fighting their way, but by refusing to. By holding your center amidst chaos, you deprive it of fuel. By staying calm, you reveal their emptiness. And by grounding yourself in truth, you expose illusion for what it truly is. So when the narcissist acts bewildered, irritated, or vindictive in response to your peace, don't question your progress. See what's truly occurring. Their dark spirit is frightened, not because you shouted, but because you didn't. Your calmness is living proof that they no longer possess ownership over your emotions. In that moment, quiet, steady, and unshaken, you become everything they fear most. Let that realization strengthen you. There's something profoundly disturbing about witnessing a narcissist begin to mimic you. It's subtle at first. You start to notice they use your phrases, borrow your tone, mirror your values, even adopt your spiritual vocabulary. You wonder, are they finally evolving? Have they changed? But something inside you knows it's not genuine. It's hollow. It's not admiration. It's imitation. And that imitation isn't a compliment. It's a warning. It's evidence that the narcissistic spirit within them is beginning to panic. Because when a narcissist starts to copy you, it means they've already recognized your strength and are desperately trying to possess it. Narcissists don't build identities, they construct illusions. They conjure mirages to attract what they desire. They don't create authenticity, they fabricate appearances. Their sense of self isn't rooted in truth, it's borrowed, stitched together from the qualities and energies of others. And when they encounter someone who radiates clarity, grounded confidence, or emotional depth, they do what they've always done. They attempt to absorb it. They mimic, they mirror, they morph, not out of love, but out of fear. Your wholeness exposes their emptiness. Your authenticity highlights their deceit. Your strength reveals their dependency. So they imitate, hoping that by copying your light, they can disguise their shadow. Psychologically, this is called mirroring, and in narcissistic dynamics, it's anything but innocent. It's not the natural empathy-based mirroring humans use to bond. It's a calculated survival tactic. Narcissists learned early in life that they were not enough as they were. Somewhere along the way, through neglect or rejection, they absorbed the belief that their true self was unworthy. So they created a false self, a mask, to gain attention, admiration, or dominance. But this mask requires constant maintenance. It needs constant feeding, and that's where you come in. When you embody truth, clarity, and grounded presence, you radiate a frequency they crave but cannot sustain. They feel magnetized by it, not because they love it, but because it represents the very thing they've severed from. Instead of healing, they try to steal. They study you, emulate you, even compete with you. But at its core, this isn't admiration, it's desperation. And this is where the spiritual aspect becomes undeniable. Narcissism isn't just psychological, it's a distortion of the soul, it's the absence of authenticity, the rejection of truth. What they see in you is the reflection of what they've lost: connection to self, to spirit, to love. It's not your personality they want, it's your life force. They're not stealing your style, they're siphoning your essence, like a shadow trying to mimic sunlight, hoping that imitation can make it real. But imitation without transformation is spiritual theft, and truth can't be faked forever. Eventually, the mask slips. The language doesn't match the energy. The gestures don't align with the heart. The very people they once fooled begin to feel something off because it is off. What's being projected is hollow, disconnected, incongruent. The illusion inevitably collapses under the weight of its falseness, and the truth, as always, stands silently, unshaken, waiting to be seen. It's performance, and that performance becomes harder to sustain the closer they are to someone authentic. That's why narcissists so often devalue the very people they imitate, because the more they attempt to absorb you, the more they realize they can't become you. And that gap, the distance between who you are and who they pretend to be, becomes unbearable. They begin to feel exposed, inferior, and vulnerable. And instead of facing those emotions and evolving, they attack. They belittle you, mock you, twist your strengths into flaws. Why? Because the imitation has failed, because the possession was incomplete, and the spirit within them, the one that feeds on control, cannot tolerate defeat. But here's the crucial part. You must not internalize any of this. When someone mimics your strength and then punishes you for possessing it, it's not a reflection of your failure. It's evidence of their fragmentation. It's the symptom of their inability to embody what they pretend to understand. This pattern isn't truly about you at all. It's about the war inside them, a battle between the false self they've created and the truth they briefly glimpse in your presence. This brings us to a deeper psychological and philosophical reality. Every time you live in your truth, you invite others to do the same. Your clarity becomes a mirror, one that reflects both beauty and distortion. Some people will gaze into that mirror and feel inspired to evolve, Others will see their own distortion reflected back and respond with shame, envy, or anger. The narcissist belongs to this latter group because when you appear whole, it reminds them that they are fractured. When you embody depth, it exposes their superficiality. And instead of asking, "How can I grow into that wholeness?" they ask, "How can I take it for myself?" This is the darker energy behind their mimicry. It's parasitic. It doesn't want to witness your light, it wants to wear it like a costume. But here's the twist. No matter how perfectly they copy you, no matter how many of your words they borrow, your tone they echo, or your beliefs they repeat, it never truly works. Because what you carry isn't a script, it's spirit. It's not something they can copy and paste. It's something you've earned through experience and integrity. And that's what disturbs them most. They want what you possess, but they don't want to endure what you endured to gain it. They crave the fruit without planting the roots, the wisdom without the wounds, the depth without the descent. And so they mimic. But mimicry always fails because sooner or later, the soul recognizes authenticity. The body senses it. The people around them sense it. And most painfully, they sense it too. They realize they're playing a part, and that awareness ignites terror, not fear of you in a physical sense, but fear of what you represent. You represent freedom, and they, despite all their posturing, remain bound. So when you notice the imitation, don't be flattered. Don't be confused. Be conscious. See it for what it truly is, a desperate attempt to absorb your energy without facing their own brokenness. And do not engage, because the instant you begin defending, explaining, or reclaiming what was mirrored, you step down into their arena, and that's precisely where they want you. Instead, rise above it. Let your truth speak louder than their pretense. Let your consistency expose their contradictions. Let your stillness reveal their instability. And remember, the light you carry cannot be copied. It can only be embodied, and embodiment requires work they are unwilling to do. Your power doesn't come from how loudly you speak. It comes from how clearly you live. And when that clarity is mimicked, it's not flattery, it's confirmation. Confirmation that what you've cultivated is genuine, powerful, and untouchable. So let them mimic, let them pretend, let them perform, because no matter how convincing the imitation seems, your truth will outlast their illusion. In the end, the imitator is always chasing, while the one who lives in truth simply is. Don't dim your light because it makes their shadow tremble. Let it shine, let it expose, let it disturb whatever still hides in darkness, because your authenticity isn't just a blessing, it's a spiritual weapon. And in the presence of truth, falsehood always flinches. That's the power they try to steal, and that's the power you must never surrender. One of the most revealing signs that a narcissist is spiritually unsettled by you, often without even understanding why, is when your mere presence causes them to shift. Sometimes it's subtle. Their tone changes, their posture stiffens, the air seems heavier. Other times it's more obvious. They suddenly grow cold, dismissive, or mocking in small, cutting ways. And if you pay attention, you'll notice that these reactions occur precisely when you're most grounded, most at peace, simply existing in your truth. You're not attacking or accusing, you're just being, and that alone unnerves them. Why? Because your presence itself becomes a mirror they cannot face. Narcissists live in a psychological theater, a carefully staged performance meant to project confidence, power, and control. Their entire identity is constructed to maintain an illusion, an act designed to gain validation, admiration, or dominance. Everything they present to the world is rehearsed and curated. and for a while, it works. Many people believe the act. They're charmed by the confidence, drawn to the charisma. But the moment someone authentic enters the room, something shifts. The facade begins to crack. The narcissist feels it before they consciously understand it. It's not about what you say or do, it's about what you are. You represent everything they've avoided becoming. Your calmness, your emotional integrity, your refusal to play games, it all disrupts their script. You introduce truth into a world built on illusion. That's why they suddenly shift. You haven't exposed them verbally, but your energy exposes them internally. Their mask starts to fracture, not because you attacked it, but because it can't withstand the light of something real. You become, in essence, the embodiment of what they pretend to be. This is where the dynamic becomes deeply psychological and profoundly spiritual. Narcissists aren't merely manipulative individuals, that's only the surface. At the core, narcissism is a distortion of being, a fragmentation of identity. They've lost or perhaps never developed a stable, integrated sense of self. What replaces that self is a carefully crafted persona built to defend against shame and unworthiness. And the more integrated, self-aware, and authentic a person is, the more threatening they are to that false construct. Think of it as a shadow standing beside a flame. The brighter the light, the sharper and more visible the shadow becomes. The narcissist experiences that contrast as exposure. You're not intentionally calling them out, but their psyche interprets your presence as danger, because you are living proof that authenticity exists, and their entire system is built on denying that truth. You are a walking contradiction to their narrative. You represent freedom, integrity, and wholeness. And for someone trapped in denial, truth feels like annihilation. That's why their reactions can seem so extreme. One moment they're charming, the next they're distant or hostile. One day they're praising you, and the next they're subtly tearing you down. You might wonder, what changed? The answer is nothing in you. What's changed is their recognition of what you represent. Your composure, your emotional clarity, your refusal to participate in the performance. These things aren't neutral in their world. They are deeply destabilizing. You embody a reality that can't be controlled, and control is the foundation of their fragile existence. You'll often notice them avoiding eye contact, interrupting, or trying to dominate conversations when you're around. They'll steer discussions into performance mode or turn the spotlight onto themselves. These are defensive maneuvers. They're not asserting power, they're scrambling to preserve identity, because in the company of someone who isn't hypnotized by their act, the act itself begins to crumble. That's spiritual dissonance, the collision between illusion and authenticity. Their spirit, the one that thrives on dominance and adoration, feels that collision instinctively. And here's the fascinating part. Sometimes they'll try to regain their equilibrium by diminishing you, not because they believe you're lesser, but because lowering you helps them feel safer. You'll notice subtle digs, backhanded compliments, or veiled criticisms. They'll question your motives, challenge your confidence, or twist your words. It's not logic, it's survival. What's being threatened isn't your behavior, it's your being. They're attempting to dim what they can't replicate. This dynamic isn't just interpersonal, it's archetypal. Across myths, religions, and philosophies, there's a recurring pattern. When truth enters a space, falsehood must respond. Sometimes it lashes out, sometimes it retreats, but it always reacts, because the presence of something whole forces the broken to face itself. Your groundedness calls their chaos to the surface. Your inner balance makes their dissonance impossible to ignore. And that is the silent power of authenticity. It doesn't fight illusion. It exposes it simply by existing. But here's the danger, and it's a trap that many unknowingly fall into. You start doubting yourself. You notice their discomfort, their distance, their sudden coldness, and you internalize it. You begin to think, did I do something wrong? Did I offend them somehow? Maybe I should ease up, soften my presence, make myself smaller. But that's precisely what the narcissistic spirit wants. It wants you to shrink, to question, to bend. Because the moment you do, they regain control, not through strength, but through your self-abandonment. Do not shrink. Do not soften what is true just because it makes someone else uneasy. When your mere presence causes someone to react with envy, hostility, or defensiveness, and deep down you know you've done nothing wrong, it's not about you. It's about what you represent. You're not the threat. They're being threatened by what they sense in you, even if they can't articulate it. That's why narcissists are often magnetically drawn to those who are deeply self-aware, empathetic, and morally grounded. Because in a strange, tragic way, they are starving for what you carry. They want to be close to the light, but not changed by it. They crave your strength, your calm, your essence, but without facing what it takes to develop those qualities themselves. And so proximity becomes torment. They want to be near you, yet they cannot endure what being near reveals. That's why they oscillate between idealizing and attacking you. They'll either attempt to possess your light or extinguish it. But in either case, their reaction exposes the truth. You are not weak. You are not too much. You are not the problem. You are the reflection of what they could be if only they had the courage to face themselves. You are not causing their turmoil. You're merely reminding them of what they've buried. So when your presence causes them to shift, to pull away, to grow distant, to lash out, or attempt dominance, remember what's actually happening. You've walked into the room as yourself, and that alone is enough to shake the foundations of someone built on illusion. Don't retreat from that. Don't apologize for existing as you are. Own it, because your presence isn't just a statement, it's a revelation. And for those still hiding, that revelation will either spark transformation or trigger retreat. Either way, it's not your duty to manage their reactions. Your only responsibility is to stay rooted in truth, to continue showing up fully, to walk in the clarity you've earned, regardless of who feels unsettled by it. The moment you begin to dilute yourself for the comfort of others, you step back into the illusion. And you weren't born for illusion. You were born for truth. Sometimes simply being is the most courageous act of all. So don't be surprised when the narcissist shifts in your presence. Be aware. Be still. Let the truth you carry do what it always does. Reveal what was never real to begin with. One of the most revealing moments in a narcissistic dynamic comes when the smear campaign begins. You might have left quietly. You might have set boundaries without anger or malice. You might have simply chosen peace over conflict. And yet, suddenly, whispers start circulating. Distorted stories, exaggerated claims, outright lies. People you've never harmed are being told that you're unstable, vindictive, toxic, even dangerous. The narcissist crafts a narrative that paints you as the villain and themselves as the misunderstood victim. If you're not grounded in your truth, this can feel deeply disorienting, even humiliating. But here's what you must understand at the deepest level. When the smear campaign begins, it means the narcissist has already lost, not just in terms of power over you, but spiritually. Because when a person abandons truth to manipulate perception, they are no longer seeking healing or even control. They're trying to survive. And what they're trying to survive is the collapse of the illusion that once held them together, an illusion that required your participation to exist. Smear campaigns are not acts of strength. They are desperate maneuvers to preserve control over a narrative that's slipping away. The more calm, centered, and detached you become, the more threatened their false self feels. Because you're no longer playing your assigned role in their drama. You're not reacting, not defending, not pleading for understanding, and to someone who thrives on chaos, your stillness is deafening. It's a silence that echoes louder than any accusation. So what do? They turn outward. They begin whispering to anyone who will listen, painting you as irrational, unkind, or cruel. They weaponize their charm, their fake humility, their emotional theatrics, and they do all of it while portraying themselves as the wounded one. Here lies the trap. If you're not careful, you'll start trying to defend yourself. You'll feel compelled to correct the story, to prove your innocence, to reclaim your image. But every time you engage, you step back into their web. You give life to the illusion they're spinning. The smear campaign isn't just about how others see you, it's about pulling you back into the performance. It's the final attempt to provoke you, to destabilize you, to make you react in ways that validate their narrative. If they can push you to lash out, break down, or panic, they win, because then they can say, "See, I told you so." But if you stay grounded, if you allow the lies to exist without chasing them down, something remarkable happens. The illusion collapses under its own weight. Falsehood, no matter how convincing, cannot sustain itself without your reaction. It needs fuel. It feeds on your outrage, your pain, your urgency to be understood. When you withhold that energy, the story begins to unravel, slowly at first, but inevitably. What people often fail to grasp is that narcissists are terrified of irrelevance. Their entire sense of existence depends on being central to someone's emotions, whether through admiration or conflict. If they're adored, they matter. If they're hated, they still matter. But if they're ignored, they vanish from the emotional landscape they've worked so hard to dominate. And that is what your silence gives them, not vengeance, but something far more devastating: disempowerment. From a psychological standpoint, smear campaigns are projections. The narcissist projects the traits they cannot face within themselves onto you. They accuse you of what they secretly fear being. They assign you the blame that truly belongs to them, because acknowledging their internal fractures would destroy the persona they've built. So instead, they externalize their chaos. They transform their shame into your false reputation. This isn't just manipulation, it's spiritual inversion. It's darkness masquerading as light, brokenness pretending to be whole. And once you recognize that, you stop trying to reason with it. You stop wrestling with shadows. You realize that your task is not to persuade anyone of your truth. It's to live it so clearly, so consistently, that time itself becomes your witness. There's a profound spiritual lesson here, echoed across philosophies and faiths. Truth does not need to scream, it endures. It doesn't always win quickly, but it always wins completely. Those who are capable of discernment will eventually see. Maybe not immediately, not loudly, but inevitably. Because lies travel fast, but they age poorly. Time corrodes deception. Time exposes performance. And in contrast, truth becomes more luminous the longer it stands in silence. That's why your greatest power in the face of a smear campaign isn't outrage. It's dignity, it's composure, it's the unshakable refusal to let someone else's spiritual sickness redefine who you are. Because at the end of the day, you know what happened, you know what's real. And while that might not quiet the noise right away, it gives you something infinitely more valuable: peace. The narcissist may take your name into their stories, but they cannot touch your essence. They can twist your narrative, but they cannot alter your soul. And if you hold your ground, not just outwardly, but internally, you emerge not just intact, but refined. There's something profoundly resilient about refusing to fight back in the way they expect, about letting your integrity, not your arguments, be your defense. This is not weakness. This is mastery, the highest form of strength, because only those with nothing to prove can stand unshaken in silence. Only those who have transcended the need for approval can remain calm while being misunderstood. That's not passivity. That's power. It's the quiet, immovable force of truth itself, patient, enduring, and undefeated. And here's what often unfolds when you take that path. Eventually, the narcissist's narrative begins to crumble because maintaining a fabricated story demands constancy. And most narcissists, while gifted at short-term manipulation, struggle to preserve coherence over time. Their inconsistencies start to show. Their mask begins to slip. The very people who once sided with them start to question. Maybe not immediately, maybe not openly, but doubt begins to seep in. And that doubt is all it takes for the illusion to start breaking apart. So if you find yourself targeted by a smear campaign, here's what I would tell you. You don't need to fight for your name. You need to live from your truth. That's how you reclaim what was taken. Not by tearing their lies apart, but by living so clearly, so authentically, that those lies cannot survive in your light. And yes, it requires immense strength, tremendous inner power to stay silent when every fiber of you wants to scream, to walk away when you long to explain, to release when you want to justify. But that strength isn't hollow stoicism. It's rooted in the understanding that truth doesn't always shout. It reveals itself in outcomes, in evidence, in fruit. The fruit of your peace, of your growth, of your quiet joy. In the end, smear campaigns are a desperate finale. They are the last gasps of a crumbling illusion. The narcissist throws dust into the air, hoping to blind others to reality. But dust always settles, and when it does, vision returns. Let your clarity speak. Let your calm presence do the talking. Because while their lies may echo for a season, your truth will endure, and endurance is your victory. There's a profound shift that happens when a narcissist realizes they can no longer manipulate you. Something subtle, yet spiritually immense. They begin to avoid you entirely. Not just in the physical sense, but emotionally, mentally, and even energetically. Conversations become shallow, interactions feel forced or vanish altogether. They stop seeking you out unless it benefits their image or narrative. And though that avoidance may initially feel like punishment or rejection, it's actually revelation. They are not avoiding you. They're avoiding what you now symbolize. Because when a narcissist can no longer infiltrate your mind, sway your emotions, or invade your peace, they are left with only one choice: distance. And that distance isn't control, it's surrender. In the narcissistic worldview, people aren't connected with for intimacy or authenticity. They're used for regulation and control. Every relationship is transactional, a mirror for their ego, a performance for validation. And when someone in that dynamic stops reacting the way they need, when that person begins seeing clearly, speaking truthfully, and refusing to collapse, the whole structure begins to fracture. The narcissist can no longer extract emotional energy. You no longer provide supply. You don't flinch when they withhold affection or twist the story. And so, as pride always does when it's wounded, it retreats. But this withdrawal is not peace. It's not reconciliation. It's not two souls parting gently. It's the silence of something that once fed on your energy, realizing the feast is over. It's not mere absence, it's defeat. The avoidance is deliberate, yes, but it's also spiritual. Because deep within, whether they're aware or not, they sense they're no longer safe around you. Not because you pose a physical threat, but because your stillness, your insight, and your emotional clarity act as a mirror they can no longer bear to face. At this point, it becomes less about them and more about you. The change in the narcissist's behavior isn't merely evidence of their dysfunction. It's confirmation of your evolution. People don't retreat from weakness. They retreat from strength they cannot corrupt. And if you've noticed their absence, if they no longer engage in the old games, if they've stopped pressing your emotional buttons, it means something profound. Those buttons no longer function. You've healed. You've grown resilient. You've become immune to manipulation. And that, from both a psychological and spiritual perspective, is the narcissist's greatest fear. Avoidance in this context is not serenity, it's evasion. It exposes what they cannot admit, that they've lost control, not only over you, but increasingly over their own inner world. They might disguise it well. They might act detached, overly busy, or suddenly involved in new people or pursuits, but if you look closely, you'll see the restlessness beneath the surface. It's frantic energy pretending to be composed, because deep down they know the game has ended and you no longer play your part. They're not avoiding you out of maturity. They're avoiding what your presence now awakens in them: inadequacy, shame, exposure. They can't perform the old illusions anymore. They can't lie convincingly. They can't manipulate with ease. You see through them. You speak plainly. You remain calm. So they retreat, not from disdain, but from fear. And yet, part of you may wonder, maybe they've moved on. Maybe they've changed. Maybe I was the problem. But that's exactly the illusion they want to maintain. Because if they can convince you and others that their silence equals strength, they regain an appearance of control. But appearance is all it is. Deep within, the narcissist is haunted by irrelevance, the one thing they dread most. Their entire self-concept relies on occupying mental and emotional space in others. And when you deny them that space, they start to unravel. That's where your true responsibility begins, not to them, but to yourself, because their withdrawal gives you something they never intended to: space. Space to hear your own voice again. Space to remember who you were before the distortion. Space to rebuild your sense of worth, independent of their approval or disapproval. You now have the rare chance to stop chasing what was never genuine, to stop accepting what was never healthy, to stop waiting for validation that was never coming. Avoidance, when you understand it properly, is reflection. It reflects the discomfort your presence now brings to those who can no longer manipulate you. So don't interpret their distance as abandonment. See it for what it is: evidence of your boundaries taking root. It shows that your spirit has grown too strong to be ensnared. From a deeper philosophical and spiritual lens, this marks a sacred transformation, When someone cannot stand in your presence, not because you've done them harm, but because you've outgrown their illusion, it signifies something transcendent. Your healing has become protection. Your truth acts like a cleansing light. Your wholeness itself becomes an impenetrable boundary. You have become a mirror that only reflects authenticity, and those committed to falsehood cannot endure that reflection. So, when the narcissist withdraws, let them. Don't chase the silence. Don't try to interpret their disappearance as a loss. Let absence reveal clarity, because the void they leave isn't emptiness, it's purification. It's the clearing away of confusion, deceit, and emotional contamination. Yes, it might ache at first. There's pain in realizing someone never truly saw you, only used you. There's grief in acknowledging the energy and love you offered to someone who could never truly reciprocate. But what you gain in return surpasses all of that: clarity, peace, and sovereignty over your own being. And that sovereignty, that quiet independence of spirit, is precisely what they feared from the beginning. People driven by narcissistic patterns don't just fear being exposed, they fear losing psychological control. Your refusal to engage, to react, to return to their script, that's ultimate power. Not loud, not vengeful, but calm, steady, undeniable power. You don't have to prove a thing. You don't have to justify your peace. You don't have to defend yourself against the silence they weaponize. Because that silence, in truth, isn't dominance. It's resignation to reality. The final and most telling sign that a narcissistic energy is terrified of you is not rage, not mocking, not even slander. It's avoidance. The inability to look you in the eye, to share space with you, to exist in your presence without flinching. They can't face the very person they once thought they could manipulate, because now you see. And once you truly see, you cannot be controlled. That is the highest form of freedom and their greatest fear. So if they avoid you now, let them. Don't confuse their retreat with rejection. It's a reflection of who they are, not who you are. And if ever you doubt how far you've come, if you wonder whether walking away, holding your boundaries, standing in truth was worth it, remember this: the clearest sign that you've healed is when toxicity no longer pursues you. It retreats from you. Let that truth settle deep within you. Let that be your confirmation. And above all, let that be your peace.